Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Tonight's broadcast is brought to you by naturebox.com, where you can order great tasting, healthy snacks delivered right to your door. Forget the vending machine. Get in shape for summer with healthy, delicious treats like everything bagel sticks and a whole lot more. Support this show. You get 50% off your first order at naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. That's naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. I'm heading to Memphis, Tennessee this coming Saturday to bear witness to the live exchange between Matt Dillahunty and presuppositional apologist Tim Bruggencate. The event's called Refining Reason, and it's going to be a great thing in front of a live audience. Now, I understand a lot of people in the free thought movement don't think this is a great idea. They're like, why bother? This guy is craving attention. He's craving the spotlight, and you're giving it to him. You know, he wants to feel important, he wants to be important, and you are giving him a position of importance. Why do it? Plus, the presuppositional apologist is hugely frustrating to have a conversation with. Now, obviously, the presupposes that the scripture is true. Because of divine revelation, I now presuppose that the Bible is absolutely error-free and true with a capital T. And any contrary evidence that comes my way, anything that science might say that doesn't really jive with the scriptures, well, I reject that because I presuppose the scriptures to be true. Essentially a variation on the personal experience argument, right? Which is hugely unprovable and stands in contrast to everybody else's personal experience argument. You're saying, because my invisible friend revealed it to me, I know it's true. And the only reason you are moral and the only reason there's a standard for logic and all these other things is because that standard came from my invisible friend over here. And what they'll often do as a debate tactic is they'll throw out a moral question. Is rape wrong? Then you take the bait and you say, of course it's wrong. And they say, well, how do you know that? How do you know rape is wrong? I mean, if you didn't have an objective standard, well, you wouldn't know whether or not rape was wrong. How did you get this information? What's your measuring stick, right? As if this is a great proof. It completely ignores the larger and much more complex and I think much more interesting issue of morality in nature. In fact, morality as we see it as evolved creatures. And, you know, it's a hugely complex subject. We've tackled it in the past. I think we called the podcast Morality. We spent like an hour and a half on the subject. But anyway, you can see how an audience might be frustrated by some of this. But I think it's a great idea, and I think Matt definitely should be on stage this Saturday, and here's why. Matt Dillahunty has been on the front lines of debate for how many years now? I mean, he's just been at it for a long time, and as host of the Atheist Experience, fielding calls largely from believers. He's always having to entertain and analyze and often refute ridiculous arguments. He's aware of the apologists, their tactics, the tap dancing that the apologist does, the sort of word salad that happens often when you're watching people defend the indefensible, and so he can see that train coming. And I just think it's going to be a fun exchange. It'll be fun. It'll be fun to watch Matt and Cy go head-to-head in front of a live audience. If there's fireworks, and I expect there to be fireworks, that'll be fun. If good information is presented, at least from one side, that'll be fun. If Tim Bruggencate gets pissed off and walks out of the event, that'll be fun. Bye! You know, I mean, I just think it's a win-win. So if you're going to be near Memphis this coming weekend, or you'd like to be, all the details are at recoveringfromreligion.org/refining reason. And if you see me out there, come up and tap me on the shoulder. I'd love a chance to shake your hand and meet you in Memphis. Tonight's broadcast is really all about your letters tonight. It's all your email. And before we get into, I got a host of emails from all around the world, everybody sharing some very, very interesting stories and questions and perspectives. Before we do that, tonight's sponsor, of course, is Nature Box. Hugely thankful for their support of this show. A terrific way to snack smarter and eat better, especially when so many of us have found ourselves browsing the candy bar aisle and the chip aisle and the vending machines and even those little health bars you get at the convenience stores, often just loaded with sugar, loaded with fat. Nature Box not only provides a great tasting alternative, but it delivers right to your door. Stuff like banana bread granola, peppery pistachios, honey mesquite almonds, dark chocolate berry trail mix, teriyaki twists, baked sweet potato fries, and a whole lot more. Over 100 snacks to choose from, 0 trans fats, 0 high fructose corn syrup, nothing artificial, and free shipping anywhere in the U.S. It's just a great idea. Healthy snacks that actually taste good, selected by you and then delivered directly to you. So support our sponsor and this podcast by going to naturebox.com/thinkingatheist and get 50% off your first box. naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. My first email tonight is by Chris, who says this: I'm writing because I'm frustrated and angry, and I feel like I have no choice but to keep it all in. A lot of it comes from the everyday interactions with the religious that all free thinkers have to deal with, but most of my anger is reserved for 2 people: my parents. For some background, I'm originally from South Carolina and was brought up in the Mormon church until I was 15, when my whole family left together. My parents were both raised in different faiths as children, but they converted to Mormonism just before I was born. I'm not sure of their reasons for leaving, but I was sure of mine and my younger brother's. He and I had always been deep thinkers, and as we got older, the faith made no sense to either of us. I remember he and I whispering to each other in the dark about our faith, asking questions, wondering, searching the scriptures, and always being afraid of being discovered for simply being curious. I was lucky in that we all left together as a family. I didn't have to deal with family rejection. I was still a Christian at that point, but for the next few years I spent time searching other denominations while slowly deprogramming myself of Mormon teachings. My parents never wanted to talk about our past Mormonism. We weren't even allowed to tell anyone that we had belonged to that particular church. My parents believed in hiding, while I believed in openness. It was one of the major things that divided us. The year after our departure from Mormonism, when I was 16, I came out to my parents as a lesbian. I'd always known that I was gay. Even as a small child, I'd come out to them because my girlfriend's mom had found my notes after searching her daughter's room. Her mother threatened to show them to my girlfriend's physically abusive father if she did not end things with me. Her own mother was threatening my girlfriend with physical assault. I couldn't believe it. I desperately needed advice. I needed help. I needed support. I was terrified to come out, but Mom and Dad had always said I could tell them anything, so I did. My parents' first reaction was to ask all sorts of things about what I had done physically with my girlfriend. Had we kissed? Had we touched each other? How? In what way? My mother even told me a story about her experimenting with her childhood best friend, which I later learned was a lie to elicit information from me. I told them that none of that was important, but I needed advice about my girlfriend's situation. Well, they said we'd talk later that night. I was in the shower later that night when my mother burst through the door and screamed at me to get dressed and come to her room. As I entered, I saw my father sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands, while Mom stood next to him, hands on hips and looking furious. For the next hour, I was berated for being selfish, for experimenting with sinful sexuality, for not thinking of how people would view them if word got out about my lesbian activities. They took away all my freedoms and instituted all kinds of rules I had to follow, which would make it impossible for me to see my girlfriend or even my friends outside of school. And then came the bomb. Mom strode up to me and said, "It's a sin, you know. You'll go to hell for it. Now I want to hear you say it." I stood there, confused, angry, sad, and desperately lonely. So I said the words she wanted to hear. I told her that my sexuality was a sin, and I was going to hell. And at the time, I believed every word wholeheartedly. I threw myself back into the closet. My girlfriend left me on horrible terms, and I spent the next 3 years trying to reconcile my sexuality with my Christian faith, while at the same time carrying on a secret, long-term relationship with my best friend from high school, a Southern Baptist. Ironically, history had always been a passion my parents discouraged me from pursuing in college, but it was this passion that ended up saving me. I researched the veracity of the Bible and the gospel accounts, all that stuff. I came away an atheist, and I never felt freer. I was now 19, and with that religious burden gone, I felt strong enough to come out for a second time to my parents. Their reaction was friendly, a strange 180 from the previous 3 years. Mom said I was still too young to label myself, and I still needed to not tell anyone what I thought I might be. I ended up telling everyone, and damn it, I felt like I was finally who I was supposed to be. Since then, I've never trusted either of my parents. Their house is still a place of hostility and negativity. It doesn't help that my mother has dived into religion with renewed vigor, fully embracing the likes of Joel Osteen and Joyce Meyer, whose books, day calendars, CDs, and other bullshit she's more than willing to buy ad nauseum. 6 years ago, I moved to South Korea to teach English, and they've been the happiest years of my life. I don't tell my parents much about my life here, but then again, they rarely ask. We barely email or Skype. At some point, my atheism came out a year or so ago around Christmas time, and my mom flipped out. She couldn't believe it. Her first response was, "What about baby Jesus?" To which I replied, "Well, what about baby Saturn?" That didn't go over so well. A month ago, she sent me a long email imploring me to find God and develop a loving relationship with Jesus. She said it was her fault that I didn't love Jesus because she dragged us into Mormonism. She said I'd never been a true Christian, and that I was, and I quote, "spiritually lost and wandering on life's path." She has no idea how happy a person I am. I'm surrounded by loving friends, hailing from all over the world. I love my job as a teacher. My students love me, and I've been in a 5-year relationship with a beautiful, smart, loving Korean woman that I can't imagine living without. Mom knows none of this. She's more willing to believe I'm a sick heathen, according to her Bible, than to know I'm a well-adjusted, well-loved, happy 31-year-old woman. I'm frustrated because I want to tell her and my dad all of this and more, but I don't know how, or even if I should. I have so much anger for them both, but I don't know how to direct that anger into something positive. Telling them directly will get me nowhere and only lead to more pain. I thought about writing a book about all this, but I don't think anyone would read it. But I think that putting something out there in the universe would help me cope. I don't need the negativity of their religion in my life. I don't shove my atheism in their faces. I've tried establishing rules and limits with them, but they, especially Mom, keep pushing their agenda every chance they get. They're not proud of me or what I'm doing with my life, which my brother told me not long ago as he overheard it in their conversation. He still lives with them, and his room is right next to theirs with paper-thin walls. Living halfway around the world has helped me more than anyone will ever know, and I'm grateful for the life I have. Disapproving parents be damned. They lost their rights to judge me 15 years ago when they shunned me instead of supporting me. I've been listening to your podcast for several years now, and I just wanted to say thank you for all that you do, for all the efforts you put forth to help us all not feel so alone, and for being a soothing voice in the storm. Much love from South Korea. Chris, thank you so much for a beautiful letter. My next email is from Sheila, and the email goes like this. Throughout my childhood, my devoutly Pentecostal mother dragged me to church every Sunday and enrolled me in an incredibly strict Baptist school, the kind where girls couldn't wear pants and you'd get scolded for having worldly conversations about cute boys. She was also involved in an incredibly abusive marriage. Even at the young age of 7, it struck me as incredibly backward to hear my mother and stepfather singing praises Sunday mornings when I'd heard the yelling and swearing and shattering plates as they fought on Saturday nights. My mother sought counseling through the pastors at the church. When my stepfather beat her, she walked in sobbing with a swollen, bruised face and pleaded for help. The advice of the church? She needed to pray and consider what lessons about submission to her husband God was trying to teach her. Despite all of this, my mother is still a devout believer. Thankfully, she's now in another church and happily remarried to a kind man, and she seems at peace. I never possessed the same ability to compartmentalize. The reaction of the church to my home life caused me to start reevaluating my beliefs. It took years, but as of 8 months ago, I'm finally comfortable calling myself an atheist. I never officially came out to my mother, although I did express doubts. She's a very perceptive woman, though, and has begun behaving differently toward me. When we visit for dinner, instead of waiting for me to sit at the table, she'll start praying before I've got my food, oftentimes saying, "Sheila's a godless heathen, she doesn't pray." Or in conversation, she'll say things like, "Sheila was always such a good kid, I don't know what happened." All of these comments happen with me in the room, but she refers to me in the third person. Other conversations are fine, lots of I love yous and solid conversations about work and how my daughter's growing and such, but every now and then she just drops these condescending insults. To be clear, the only thing that's changed in our relationship is that I no longer adhere to her faith. I'm not a bad person. I work full-time in residential social work. I'm married to a wonderful man. I'm raising a beautiful, inquisitive daughter. I'm not some screw-up woman child. For her to say these things truly hurts because the message that I am lesser is clear. I've tried bringing my feelings up with her, but she turned it into a massive guilt trip, saying, "The only thing that mattered to me as a mother was raising you kids with a strong spiritual foundation and an unwavering faith in Jesus. Somehow I failed, but I have a right as a mother to call it as I see it." I'm 25 years old and honestly not sure how to approach this situation. I know that you had to set some boundaries with your parents, Seth. Do you have any advice? Sheila. You know, it's funny. I didn't really intend to have that parental theme here in the first part of the show. It just kind of worked out that way with the emails back to back. But I'll go with it. And yeah, I agree. I've been through some measure of what some others have been through when it comes to religious families, and my mother and father are hugely religious people. I mean, they honeymooned in the Holy Lands, man. You know, they met at a religious university, and they honeymooned in the Holy Lands, and they've been sort of theologians their whole life. They raised us in Christian school, and we were surrounded by God speak. So the idea that I'm an atheist and an atheist activist has just been horrible for them. And it gives me no joy that it's been horrible for them. I don't take any pleasure in the embarrassment that they feel. But I have noticed this particular phenomenon happening. You know, it's funny, even before I said the word atheist, when I started to ask really hard questions and make some pretty hard challenges to my faith, my former faith, they could sense this train coming. And they went into panic mode. And they began to sort of approach me like an army might approach the castle walls, right? You're looking for a weakness, so you try a different angle, you try a different tactic, you try a different weapon, you try something new to try to break through. And I found that they were sort of coming at me from different angles on different days, trying to get through. Of course, at first it was emotion. You know, we failed as parents. If only we'd had you in church more. If only we'd prayed more. This is my failing. You know, it's because of me. That kind of thing, which is an emotional plea. then the argument from authority, then the argument for personal experience. You can't tell me that this isn't real and that this happened to me, and here's an experience, and here's the specifics of what happened, and I floated above my body in the operating room and all that type of stuff. I've heard those. Here's a PhD who happens to believe in the Bible, and he wrote a book. I want you to read this from front to back. It will convince you. Tried that tactic. I've heard Hitler. My mother actually threw out the second law of thermodynamics once in an email. How surreal is that? The second law of thermodynamics, the entropy argument. And of course, I was still getting into the argument, so I thought, well, let's go figure out what this is about. So I all of a sudden jumped headfirst into that pool and began to understand concepts of entropy. And I realized that the second law argument falls apart when you realize it's only relevant for a closed system. Chaos only increases in a closed system, but the earth is not closed. We've got the energy of the sun. We addressed this in a recent podcast with Jerry Coyne. I respond with the facts. Well, the facts didn't seem to matter. This wasn't a conversation. Wasn't a discussion. This was a monologue. I was expected to listen, process the information, have an epiphany, come to an agreement, reverse my position, and everybody cheers. The prodigal comes home. We all have a party. There's angel song, roll credits. And of course, that's not what happened. And it's interesting that I'm not over at their house knocking on their door saying, you know, you're really embarrassing me. Mom and Dad, you believe in talking donkeys. It's just embarrassing. You believe that human beings can live 1,000 years. You believe in levitation and curses and spells and witchcraft. You believe in a guy who impregnated a human woman with himself so that he could have himself horribly killed to rescue us from the torture that he himself created. You know? Am I over there doing that? Of course not. Do I respect their religion? Of course not. But I do respect their right to hold a religious belief. And they did not afford me that same respect in return. And part of it, I think, was because they felt as a mother and father, they had a right. He is our son. This is our duty. This is what we must do. And after, I don't know how long, years of back and forth, person-to-person conversations, phone conversations, email conversations, I finally drew a pretty hard line. And I said, if you cannot interact with me without injecting negativity into my life, then I will have to remove you from my inner circle here, right? Just because we share the family tree. Even close relatives doesn't give you the right to bring negativity into my life or to tell me that I'm damaged or broken or misguided or misled or a source of shame or any of that stuff. You just don't get to do that. There are plenty of people on this planet who will support me and accept me and love me for who I am and will be on my page and support me even through disagreement. And we all know what it's like to be adults who disagree about stuff, and we live around those disagreements, and yeah, we challenge each other and even have spirited debate. But we don't inject negativity into each other's lives over that disagreement. And I drew a very hard line. And as a result, we have a rather uneasy peace right now. We get a chance to enjoy each other's company. We get a chance to enjoy time together. We'll go and have lunch, and we see each other at holidays and those types of things. I will say that under the surface, it's always there. That undercurrent of disappointment is always there. And I was in Christian radio. They were so proud. You should have seen their faces. I would do a live broadcast, or we'd win a broadcasting award, or we'd MC a concert in front of thousands of people, and it would be a big deal, and my father couldn't be prouder. And now he looks at me and he just sees what I once was and what I might be again if only the prodigal is brought home. It's tragic. I think everybody has to do what they can in their own lives and sort of decide what their pain threshold is. What's the cost benefit of continuing those discussions, of drawing those lines? And only you can make that decision as to what's best for you. Claire sent me a letter and said this: usually when I tell people I'm an atheist, they literally rock back on their heels and their eyes get wide. and a horror-stricken expression crosses their faces. The expression might be the same one you'd get upon making the statement, "I'd like to torture kittens for sport." Today, though, I was doing yard work when I saw my 84-year-old neighbor being brought home by her family. She's the sweetest old lady in the world and frequently bakes cookies for our family, especially my great-nephew. I brought her over some homemade soup and chili. I never knew my grandparents, so she holds a special place in my heart. I quickly cut her some lilacs, as I do every year, and I brought them over. As we were chatting, I pointed to her 3-foot statue of the Blessed Mother, cracked and broken open by many years of exposure to the buffalo weather. I asked her if she would like my 2-foot statue, as I was getting rid of it. "Why are you getting rid of it?" she asked. And I gave Rebecca Bitzman's answer. "Well, actually, I'm an atheist now." She expressed shock, saying she'd been a Roman Catholic for 84 years, and I replied I'd been one for over 50 years. She said, "Well, why? Do you not just believe anymore?" "No, wait, it's none of my business." She paused. "I guess it's your, what's that word? It's not privilege, the other one. Prerogative?" I supplied. And she agreed. "Yeah, that was it. Your prerogative." I carried my statue across the street and placed it in her driveway, and then we hugged as we always do. I told her I loved her, as I always do, and she broke the hug and held me at arm's length. "I love you too," she said, "even though you're an atheist." If it's safe and if it's possible, I really think we ought to try and be out as atheists. The courageous LGBT community has shown that. When we keep our identity a secret, people can assume all kinds of things and marginalize us and persecute us. But when non-atheists see that we're still the same people who bring over flowers and soup and that we don't have a baby barbecue pit in the backyard, that can help eliminate prejudice. Claire, thanks for the message. I don't know, I blanched a little bit at the response of your neighbor. "I love you too, even though you're an atheist," is a little bit condescending. I may have not sounded that way in tone when you were having the conversation face to face, but I think, man, it's like saying, "I love you too, even though you're ugly," right? It's kind of how it sounds. And maybe it didn't come off that way. Maybe she was just saying, even though we disagree, my love is unconditional, and if that's the case, good for her. Doug said this, "I often find myself making exclamations of a religious nature, and then scratching my head as to why I continue to use these phrases, 'thank God,' or 'thank heavens,' as a verbal way of saying, 'whew,' but not to give God credit for the outcome. 'Jesus Christ,' as an expletive, I use that. 'Bless you,' following a sneeze. 'Oh my God,' or 'oh God,' used to indicate surprise or alarm. 'What in God's name are you doing? What the hell?' Or I'll just play devil's advocate. My wife finds my use of these both ironic and offensive, as she is a believer, but has accepted that I'm not. If you don't believe in him, why do you invoke his name? And honestly, I'm not sure what to say. These phrases seem to be so ingrained in our culture that I find they come readily to my lips, even though I'm most decidedly not a believer. Do you use such phrases? What do we replace them with in the secular world? "Oh golly" sounds more like Gomer Pyle than any modern critical thinker should. All my best to you and yours, Doug. Doug, thanks for the message. I hear about this from time to time, and I just don't sweat it. Oh my God. I say it all the time in regular conversation. Doesn't mean I believe in God. It's just an exclamation, a figure of speech. It just doesn't matter to me. And there are some people right now squirming in their chairs. It does matter. You're using God's name in everyday conversation. You're keeping it alive. You're referring to a deity. I've said bless you before when somebody sneezed, because it doesn't indicate in the year 2014 blessings upon you from my deity. It's more of just a statement of courtesy, right? It's a cultural thing. Well, bless you. I was at an event once and I heard someone say, because they were an atheist and were so averse to using that phrase, someone sneezed and they said, "Curse you." Curse you. Right? And well, that is a hugely self-conscious reaction to a very benign statement. Curse you. No. You know, you can say bless you, can say something else, but I just don't get hung up on it. You know? Oh my God. I don't say thank God. It slipped out a few times out of habit. But, you know, I think we've got bigger fish to fry right now. I wouldn't worry too much about it. And honestly, why would your wife be offended by it? And why would she be offended by common everyday language? It's part of our culture that's used to sort of express an exclamation. You know, there's no reason to be offended by any of that. It's a figure of speech, and you are speaking. Susan said this: I'm a 66-year-old grandma who was brought up in the Lutheran Church of the Wisconsin Synod. Way back in the dawn of time, when I was a little girl, I thought church was actually kind of nice. It was always the same. I went to Sunday school for an hour and then spent another hour sitting on hard pews with my parents. I'd always try to take a nap on my mother's shoulder while the minister droned on about his Bible stories. But when it was over, we'd form a line, shake his hand, and that was it till next week. People in our family didn't make a big deal about religion. Nobody ever talked about it outside of church. Sometimes I'd ask a classmate what church they went to, but lost interest when they'd tell me Episcopalian or Presbyterian. They were just foreign words to me. I always felt sorry for the Catholics, though, because I knew they were going to hell, since that's what our minister said. The only religion I cared about was ours. Lutheran was superior to all the others because we were going to heaven, wherever that was. I didn't know much about hell other than it was a bad place. It was supposed to be very hot, and there was no escape, and you burned and burned forever and ever. That's what Pastor Bartz said. But outside of his sermon, nobody ever talked about it. Lately, with all the talk from the born-again Christians, the subject of hell is in the news a lot. You said you came from one of the newer religions that stress hell, so maybe you can help me with the question that's been bugging me for years, which is, if, when we die, we leave the combustible parts of us here on earth, either in the grave or in a flask sitting on a mantle, what part of us burns in hell? Is our soul flammable? Does God reassemble us at the pearly gates before he decides which way he's going to send us? I've asked religious people that question, but never can get a straight answer. It's always something like, with God, all things are possible. I've combed through the Bible to find a passage that might give me some insight as to how it works, but every passage, while threatening, is vague. The closest one I can find is Matthew 10:28. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both the soul and body in hell. But that doesn't answer my question. It says the soul is destroyed, not burning forever. I once asked my religious sister if she knew how it all worked, and her eyes glazed over. My Bible-thumping cousin made jokes about my silly question, but neither of them could give me an answer. It's always been the ecclesiastical elephant in the room to me. What part of us burns if we leave the combustible part of us on earth? I can see why Christianity uses burning as a threat. When 9/11 happened, people jumped out of windows to escape the flames of the burning buildings. So I see why the threat of fire is very persuasive. I became a non-believer about 30 years ago. And even though I know there's no logical explanation to my question, I'd like to know how Christians think God actually burns us. Where in the Bible does it say how it happens? When you were a believer, how did you square that circle? Well, Susan, you hit on a fantastic point when it comes to the mere logistics of hell. We often talk about the morality of hell. How could you worship the architect of hell? How could heaven exist if hell exists? Those types of things. But to actually deal with the nuts and bolts of hell, hey, if you're just a spirit, how do you burn? It's a great, great way to maybe plant some seeds of curiosity and even doubt in those who've been programmed and indoctrinated with a fear of hell from their earliest memories. We didn't deal with it. When I was a believer, we just sort of skipped over it. Oh, you'll burn forever. You'll burn forever. We didn't stop to consider losing the physical body and becoming a soul or spirit and then going to hell. There are those, I've heard it preached before, that God regenerates the body in hell. So you burn and then you're regenerated and you burn again. How screwed up is that? How sadistic is that? I mean, it's beyond imagination. Obviously, hell is a construct of human beings and a method of control, a way to keep people in the dark, a way to keep people from asking questions, from testing boundaries, from challenging authority. Hell is one of those things that keeps people quiet. Personally, I sort of like the idea of tackling hell from a logistics point of view. Hey, if your spirit's down there, how do you burn? Well, it's a great angle. Susan, I think you should bring it up more often in conversation. Corey said this, "Hey Seth, I've been an atheist for a couple of years now, debated a few of my friends on various topics. One discussion I had with my adoptive brother was somewhat different. He claims to have read 4 books on the subject of evolution, half for and half against." I'm going to stop right there. Corey, I think your brother's full of crap. Back to the letter. And yet he couldn't name 2, although he said he read them 15 years prior. Not only that, he doesn't even know the mechanism by which evolution works, and vehemently asserts that it has something to do with the Big Bang. My question to you is, how do you think it's best to deal with blatantly obvious bullshit like this? The snark on my part pissed him off, which was funny, but did nothing to show him the validity of my argument, which would be preferable. Corey, I honestly think it has everything to do with whether or not your brother is sending or receiving. Right? If he's only sending, if he's only defending the position, which we talked about early, then you're wasting your time. If he's genuinely interested in understanding, if he's genuinely interested in education on the subject of evolution, I mean, I didn't know anything about evolution before. When I was a believer, I brushed it off. I spoke against it. I didn't understand it, but I knew it was false. And then when I finally got to a point of honest and sincere curiosity and began to, read books by people like Jerry Coyne, I began to understand the mechanisms by which evolution works, and see the evidence, the overwhelming mountain of evidence out there. And unless he's in that place, you're wasting your time. You're not going to change his mind. I think you can certainly present a case. I think you should present a case. There are a lot of wonderful resources on evolution, Jerry Coyne being one of them. Talk Origins has a huge section about observable evolution, dealing with everything from common ancestry to transitional fossils and vestigial organs and traits and all this other stuff. There's some wonderful resources out there. So present a case, but I wouldn't waste a whole lot of time on it. Until this person is interested in really understanding, move on. My next email is from a teenager who asked to remain anonymous. The email says this: "My mom and I got into a deep-hearted conversation about God today. She always tends to make me feel bad. She always makes it as if I have to justify myself. She backs me up into a corner because I want to find some common ground with my fellow atheists. She now is going to be restricting access to websites like YouTube and possibly The Thinking Atheist. She's offended by me watching videos like Dark Matter 2525, your podcasts, and others. I'm truly upset, Seth, and really could use some support from The Thinking Atheist." Well, I always find it unfortunate when people try to isolate their children. We see this a lot in religious homeschools. It's not even enough to be in a Christian private school. We want you in a place where we control the horizontal, we control the vertical, we control the flow of information. No contrary ideas must get in. Now, what does that genuinely say about somebody's worldview? It tells me that secretly your mother is either 1, not entirely convinced that her religious position can withstand all challenges, or 2, she secretly believes that the devil is more powerful than God. Now, she would disagree with me, I'm sure. No, that's not the case at all. I just want to protect my child. And this is a natural thing with religious parents. But stop and think about it. I mean, if she is a representative of Almighty God, the omnipotent God who spun the cosmos into existence with a breath, right, who has already defeated evil, and this truth is the ultimate truth with a capital T, wouldn't that deity and his charges here on earth welcome all challenge? Bring it on, man. Bring on Islam. It'll splash off of this thing like water splashes off the rocks on a beach. Bam, won't even budge. Jehovah's Witnesses, bring that doctrine on. Bam, instantly defeated. Scientology, Eastern religions, atheism, bring it on. I welcome the opportunity to once again demonstrate the fact of my existence and the truth of my doctrine. You would think this would be the position, but it's not. They circle the wagons. They insulate and isolate. They don't want you to hear or absorb or have the opportunity to contemplate contrary points of view. What does that say about how they feel about their own position? Also, is it a revelation that they are not trying to raise a child as much as a clone? And I'm not saying this is or isn't the case, but it's something to be explored and examined, right? Are they trying to teach a child how to think or what to think? A replication of their own mind and way of living and religious doctrine, so that you can then repeat that with your children and your grandchildren and so forth and so on. It's a protective instinct to make sure that you are never ever changed in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable. Well, is that how we genuinely approach the issues of truth? What is true? What is false? What is fact? What is fiction? What is right and what is wrong? If we're going to live honest lives and we're going to make sure that we are walking the right path and that we are living according to a truthful model, well, we have to explore all of these other things out there. You know, most of the scientific experiments that happen out there fail, don't they? But they are still useful in determining what works and what doesn't, what is fact and what isn't, what's supported by the evidence and what isn't. So I would encourage your mother, if she's genuinely interested in the truth, a truthful life, an honest, evidence-based, truthful life for herself and for you, I think it's time to open the doors and open the windows and just tear the roof off, man, and allow the light in. Allow other points of view, other voices, other perspectives, other information in. And then you just approach each piece of information honestly. And you vet that information, you ask questions, you go deeper, and every day you prepare yourself to adjust your own position if the evidence warrants. We get better evidence in tomorrow, let's adjust our position. That's what good scientists do. And honestly, it's a much more fulfilling way to live your life than to sit around on a superstitious book with your hands folded and say, hey, I quit. I don't want to hear it. No, I'm not interested. What a sad way to live. If every day is an opportunity to ask questions, to explore, to discover, even if it makes other people or even yourself uncomfortable, well, I think that's a life worth living. And that's the challenge I would make to your mother. I had an email in from someone simply calling themselves C, the initial C. I guess this is partly a public service announcement, as well as a little story about myself. As a person who was baptized in the Jehovah's Witnesses and subsequently disfellowshipped, I thought most of my past was, well, in the past. It was only years later that a conversation about blood transfusions came up with a skeptic friend of mine. As you might already know, Jehovah's Witnesses do not accept allogenic blood transfusions. I thought it was all well and good that since I was no longer a witness, I could make up my own mind about it. When I was asked if I had a significant other, which I don't, the conversation became quite alarming. If I were to be in an accident and were not able to speak for myself and I needed blood to save my life, and my parents, who are both still Jehovah's Witnesses, were the ones contacted as the ones to speak for me, they would have the say in whether or not I should receive a blood transfusion to save my life. They could very well say no to the procedure, and I would die. I had no idea. I thought I was safe. Still recovering from the whole experience, but safe. I contacted my parents. Luckily, they allowed for short phone conversations now and again. Now, I asked them both the question, what would you do if I couldn't speak for myself and I needed a blood transfusion and you were the one to speak for me? Would you say yes, that I could have a blood transfusion like I want, or would you say no? The answer was no. Luckily, I've taken steps to ensure my parents have no say in the matter. Now that I know for sure what their decision would be in such an event, I got a living will stating that if a blood transfusion were ever needed, that the doctor should give it to me. A copy of this document is with my family doctor and another copy to a family member who's not a Jehovah's Witness and willing to represent me. This isn't to say some Jehovah's Witness parents won't respect the medical views of their disfellowshipped sons or daughters. This is about taking proper precautions. I'm glad I asked my parents. I'm glad they were honest with me. It's a dark situation, but I think I did the right thing. I hope those who don't know of this, who are in this situation and who listen to your podcast, will be able to put this information to good use. C, thank you very much for kind of an alarming email. I didn't realize that was the case. If you were to go to the hospital and you had no significant other, mom and dad being Jehovah's Witnesses, could actually have you treated under their rules? Very alarming. Andrew sent a message and said, I was raised in a devoutly Lutheran home. Our family attended church twice a week, and I rarely missed a day since I was brought home from the hospital. You didn't miss church in our family, period. If you were too sick to go, you must either be close to dying or ready to go into the hospital. Being surrounded by this type of culture all my life, it was so easy to go along with everyone else and swallow the Kool-Aid I'd been spoon-fed since I was very young. My parents were loving and caring people who would do anything for their children, and I realize now, after much anger, that they were only doing what they thought best for their children. In my early 20s, a coworker and friend of mine introduced me to a YouTube video titled, The Best of the Hitch Slap. Naturally, my religious upbringing immediately put me on the defensive, and I was instantly indignant towards anything that questioned my happy little reality. Despite my trepidation and negative predisposition to Mr. Hitchens, I begrudgingly sat next to my friend and watched the whole video. I'm so glad I did. There were so many alarm bells that suddenly started to go off in my mind. The sound was so deafening that I had to do more research. Through a long 9-month self-examination of my faith, beliefs, and worldview, I said the word atheist out loud to myself while sitting in front of the computer one night, and I've not turned back since. Although I plan to come out to my family and friends soon, I still reside in the comfort of the non-belief closet that I've made my home for the past 5 years, and as a result, I still attend church weekly. On one Sunday, while driving home with my family, we began to discuss the message and what it meant. These conversations usually only last a few minutes. Then we move on to what movies are in theaters or what's on the news or who's dating so-and-so. Today, however, we began to dig through a strange rabbit hole, ranging from theology and religious text interpretation to classic concepts of the basic tenets of Christianity. A religious hypothetical that I'd heard from my childhood began to surface its way into the conversation. The question goes like this. A man walks into a room and holds a gun to your head. Deny God right now or I will kill you. What do you do? Matthew 10:33 states that if anyone denies me here on earth, I will deny that person in heaven. I'd been dropping hints slowly that I was edging away from the faith and saw this as another opportunity. I explained that I would deny God and then later ask for forgiveness. Surely God wouldn't want one of his beloved creatures to die needlessly. If we serve a loving and benevolent God, there'd be no doubt in my mind he would understand. After I'd expressed this concept, there was a long, uncomfortable silence. I looked at my parents and I could tell they were shocked and saddened. My father expressed that he was disappointed in me, that I wouldn't be willing to give my life up for God. Well, this naturally got me a bit riled up. but I decided to alter the question to try to see if I couldn't change their minds. I said that instead of a man holding a gun to their head, what if he burst down the door to our house, rounded up our entire family in a room, and asked my parents to deny God or he would kill their children? I thought that surely my parents would deny God and ask for forgiveness later. It's one thing to throw your own life away, but when you hold the power to save someone else's life, I figured it would be a no-brainer. What happened next will stay with me for the rest of my life. My mother looked at me through the rear-view mirror and stated very matter-of-factly, "Well, then I hope you're prepared to die." The idea that people as kind and as loving as my mother and father would throw away their children's lives for an invisible man in the sky still haunts me to this very day. I've never been able to look at them the same way since that drive home. I still love them and care deeply for them as much as a son possibly could. I would die for them without a moment's hesitation, though not pointlessly, as described in the situation earlier. What equally frightens and saddens me about my parents is that because of that one simple conversation, it seems to me they value their God higher than they do their own child. The fact that someone could have such an insane devotion to their God keeps me up at night. I have no idea what I'm going to say to them when I finally give them the news of my non-belief. But if this story is any indication of their mindset toward their deity, I cannot see it go well. I'm terrified to think that I may be disowned and not have two of my favorite people in my life to no longer want anything to do with me. I realize that I cannot remain in this closet for the rest of my life, and you in the podcast have given me such courage and strength when it comes to my newfound beliefs. I will be proud and unashamed of who I am. I'll let the world know soon that I'm an atheist. If you'll pardon the expression, I pray that I still have a family. After this happens, only time will tell. Andrew, your story is freaking tragic, and it echoes much of what we've already been speaking about. I think to myself, I understand playing the long game when it comes to coming out. I also blanch at the idea that people will not say out loud, "This is what I think," because society has put together so many consequences against them for doing so. The idea that you would have to say, "I sure hope I don't get disowned," does a couple of things. First of all, it reveals how far we have to go in this culture. Secondly, it's a character statement about your mother and father, and I'm not going after them. What I'm saying is, if you are worried that they will disown you, it tells me that they have already given hints that they would certainly do so, and they consider this to be acceptable behavior. It's emotional blackmail. Live our way or else. And no parent has a right to do that to a child. In fact, no family member or friend has a right to do that to someone else. I'm going to partition off a part of my heart, a portion of my love. You won't get the 100% unless you live your life my way. Absolutely unacceptable. Got an email from Roy that says this: I write this out of concern for an argument that atheists seem quite fond of using during religious debates. It's this idea that experiencing eternity would be too boring to endure. And while there's usually some extra content, the gist is, therefore an afterlife is absurd and I wouldn't want it. I understand the argument, I understand the perspective. However, I can't help but think it's fundamentally flawed. Sure, eventually eternity would probably get boring. That's just the nature of infinities after all, but that point is going to be a really, really, really long way off, unless, as I told someone else, you're doing eternity wrong. Much of the secular anti-religious perspective is that life has no intrinsic, absolute, definitive, universal meaning, that we are responsible for creating and cultivating meaning in our lives. So while there may be a degree of objective morality, by this I mean that most cultures can readily settle on a subset of definitions for terms and axioms within the field of moral philosophy, even if they may be consequences of our evolution as a social species, a discussion for another day. What you do within those confines is up to you and your abilities, motivations, and resources within whatever social milieu in which you find yourself. I wholeheartedly embrace these ideas, and I find no great philosophical challenge to allowing someone wishing to end their existence to act on that wish. Given this secular context, weak existential and moral nihilism, what gets me about this anti-immortality argument is how profoundly similar it is to the religious closed-mindedness that all atheists rail against. Where's the imagination? Where's the creativity? Where's a zest for life, as they say? I can hear you now, killed off a few million years ago. Okay, but are you sure? And even if it's inevitable that an unendingness becomes boring to the point of torturous, has your imagination been so profoundly killed that you can't be bothered to find a solution? To make an even stronger point, does immortality trump the eons of experiences you had? Does it make all the many things you experienced not worth experiencing? Of what I've explored, the only arguments against any form of immortal life that seem to retain self-consistency come to various forms of extreme nihilism, which tends toward the antithetical of humanism. I find it absurd that value can only come if we die. Worse, I tend to think of it as a misguided and selfish application of our perception of time. It's true that people, when faced with the direct and inescapable specter of their own demise, often gain a new zest for life. They try to check off items on bucket lists. They try to reevaluate and harvest more of the experiences that they find most worth cherishing. They seek out more meaning. They make attempts at creating something that can have some lasting value or impact. In short, an awareness of their impending mortality makes them more human, more humanist, specifically altruism. But this isn't evidence of the evil of immortality. It's evidence of the foibles of human thought and behavior. As I think Albert Einstein once said, "He who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe is as good as dead." Are some atheists already dead? Alive, but dead to adventure, to curiosity, to new experience? And so what if they are? Certainly there are many people who live incredibly dull, highly repetitive lives, never traveling more than a few miles from where they were born. Do you suppose that all who have ever lived that life would say it wasn't worth living? Or am I off my rocker? Roy, thank you very much for an interesting email. I don't really use the eternity would get boring argument myself. It's not really how I think about eternity. Would I like to continue living? Sure. Existence is very attractive to me. Do I see a potential devaluing of the significance and importance and the urgency of life if it goes on and on and on? Yeah, I can certainly see that. But I take your point that if we are creative thinkers and we were genuinely living life instead of merely existing, that a continued existence, possibly even an eternal existence, might be something worth embracing. That's something I'll leave to the comments sections to hammer out. My final email tonight is from Laura, and it goes like this. On May the 9th, my family members and I stood around my beloved grandma's hospital bedside and watched as she passed away. We were fortunate to be with her, to hold her hands, to stroke her hair, to say what we wanted to say. I don't honestly know if she could hear us, but they say hearing and touch are the last two things to go, and I know she knew we loved her. Here's the thing. A lot of my family members are spiritual in some way, and that's fine with me. When we were losing her, it gave them peace to think they'd see her again. I'm an atheist, though, and when she was dying, my heart broke, because to me it was goodbye for good. This beautiful woman, so clever, so creative, and funny, so incredibly warm and loving, she helped raise me and was a second mom to me. And just like that, she was gone. At her Catholic funeral service, I was one of the speakers. I told a couple funny stories about Grandma. I asked everyone to remember her smile, her laugh, and her love. I wanted to say something meaningful that reflected who she was. In the last couple of weeks, I've had well-meaning Christians hug me and tell me they'll pray for me and that I'll see her again. It's hard to hear. I don't hold their words against them because I know they think those words are a comfort. As a non-believer, though, I know what I can take comfort in. Because of her and my grandpa, my entire family exists. So much of who I am now was because of her. I'm getting married in the fall, and when we have kids, I have wonderful memories and a beautiful legacy to pass along to them. Thanks for listening and for all you do, Laura. Laura, thank you much for sharing the story. It's funny, we talked about atheist funerals or how to eulogize someone if you're not groping for those words of comfort. We'll all be reunited one day in a happy place where there's no pain. You know, these are obvious constructions of human beings to try to get through very, very difficult times. And I'm like you, it's not my job to go in and strip people of their comfort mechanisms in their darkest hour. There is a time and a place to address the issues of heaven and the afterlife and death. I don't think in the middle of a grieving situation, in a funeral, or even at the bedside of the dying is the time when we want to be arguing about whether or not we'll see Grandma in heaven. But you did it right, Laura. Right? You made her memorial service sort of a tribute to her and her life and the best parts about her, the things that sort of live on within you, the characteristics that you wanted to emulate in your own life, the happy memories you can share with your own children, family, and friends. And I think about that, when my time comes, and I hope it's a long way away, rather than have somebody in a suit come back and use it as an opportunity to proselytize and evangelize and talk about Xanadu in the sky, I'd like someone who knew me and who liked me, that always helps, to just come by and just say, this is who he was. This is what he was about. This is why his life mattered to at least a few people. This is the legacy he leaves behind. This is the person that we'll miss, hopefully we'll miss. And this is the person who, because his life rippled into ours and because he impacted us in a way he will continue on for years to come. It's a beautiful sentiment. It's a beautiful way to really honor someone's life when that life is over. And I think you did a fantastic job. Well played. Coming up next, Tuesday night, you got to join me for a special broadcast called What the Fossils Say. Dr. Donald Prothero is going to join me, talk about experts in their field. We've been talking about the need for actual scientists to come and talk about the evidence. It's going to happen next Tuesday night with Dr. Prothero. Hope you can join us for that. Tonight's broadcast, again, brought to you by naturebox.com. You can order great tasting healthy snacks. You get 50% off your first box. Forget the vending machine and get in shape for summer. Support this broadcast. Go to naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. That's naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. And I'll see you next Tuesday night on the Thinking Atheist Radio Podcast.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.